Hi, I'm Ethan, a New York City-based small business growth coach, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time with you today talking through at a very, very quick level why some organizations seem to do a better job than others when it comes to RTO or what's called return to office. And so I want to give you a primer. This is at a very high level. And then please, please, if you're interested in discussing this a little bit more, reach out to me. My contact details will be in the description below. Also, if you like the video, be sure to give a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, which really, really helps support the work that I'm doing to help organizations unleash the full potential of their people. So let's dive right in. I really, really like the assessment done by Lyft Human Capital Management. So going back to August 12th, Lyft HCM, return to office mandate, why they fail, and what HR leaders should do. So this video is about organizations taking a logical, healthy approach when it comes to bringing their employers back to an office environment, and those organizations that are not doing it with the best interest of their employees. So return to office, why they fail, and what an HR leader can do about this return to office. So what's happening is as companies have been, especially since COVID, we saw the light at the end of the tunnel of COVID, and organizations started asking their or demanding their employees come back to office. We've seen a lot of employee resistance rather than collaboration or just complete acquiescence and giving in to going back to office. So where's the resistance coming from? So are you in an HR role or leadership role struggling with unexpected employee turnover or declining engagement as you're looking to bring your employees back to an office together to have them co-located in the same office environment? Well, this seems to be a prevalent challenge. And so what you're seeing is what's being referred to as the Great Office Rebellion, which is a fundamental challenge to outdated workplace models that demand strategic leadership, not administrative mandate. So what that means is we need a new, fresh way of thinking about having our employees consider coming back to office. So the shift to remote work in many organizations was dictated by a need to have people remote during a global pandemic, right? But that time period in which employees started to work remotely fundamentally reshaped what employees expect from their jobs. And now, as we try and figure out a strategic, logical, best practice way to bring our employees back, it's not beneficial to mandate a forced return for all employees. So it's creating a friction when organizations tell their employees you have to come back, and it creates pushback from a workforce against unnecessary disruption to what's already proven in many regards is an effective way of working. So it's not about employees who are avoiding work. I mean, obviously, there are employees who are going to try and game the system and do as little as possible. Shame on you for hiring them, by the way, and not monitoring their work. But that's for a separate discussion. I'll cover that in a separate video. But it's a clear statement from you when you have a logical, sensitive approach to return to office that accommodates each employee's needs. It's more about modern productivity in the 21st century. And it's not tied necessarily to just the maybe simplistic idea that bringing people back in the office to co-locate them will automatically create greater collaboration. So at Lyft Human Capital Management, we've guided organizations through human capital challenges for decades. We understand that truly productive, engaged workers aren't built on artificially imposed mandates, but on clarity, connection, consistency, regardless of the location where the employees are being asked to work from. Productivity thrives in any organizational culture environment when trust of employees is earned, not demanded, and when policies are effectively aligned with proven capabilities of your people. So, current landscape, 90% of large employees now have some form of formal RTO return to office policy, which creates an amazing gap in workplace expectation in modern business history. So that's some of the takeaways from this article. Again, I am going to put the links to all of the resources that are referenced in this video, the way I always do, so you can do a deeper dive. I'm just going to touch on some of the salient points for the purposes of brevity, keeping this video relatively short. So what's driving the push for return to office mandates across the organizational landscape? For many organizations, fully remote or hybrid work began as a pandemic necessity. Companies quickly adapted, maintaining operations and productivity from a distance. This emergency measure, however, quickly became the preferred way of working for millions. So we now know, post-COVID, that employees prefer a hybrid and/or fully remote work environment. Employees discovered flexibility, much less commute time, and a better work-life balance, proving that practical work wasn't necessarily tied to physical office presence. Yet, as COVID gradually rescinded or kind of ebbed away, a noticeable shift began to emerge. Since middle of 2022, many major employers have pushed to recall their workforces. Companies, Amazon, Meta, Disney, Goldman Sachs started implementing what are aggressive return to office mandates, demanding that their employees be present multiple days per week, up until full-time 5-day-a-week status. Now, here's the thing. Executives justify these RTO mandates from the benefit or the perceived benefit of having people co-located, more effective in collaboration, building stronger culture and accountability. But what that does is it fails to acknowledge the success of employees being able to work remotely, and it creates animosity, and ultimately employees will push back. So organizational responses have been different. Tech, as an industry, sees very strong resistance. Finance stresses in-person needs of greater customer interaction, client engagement, and working as collaborative teams. Manufacturing must balance on-site production requirements with flexible administration. Point being, effective policies address these unique dynamics. Ignoring them leads to ongoing challenges. So from my perspective and my coaching, it's all about organizations taking in the totality of their workforce requirements, being consistent and clear, having very honest and transparent conversations, but also ultimately addressing the individual needs of employees. And that's the piece that I think sometimes gets lost in these conversations of all or nothing. So why are employees resisting these mandates to RTO? They're not resisting the work. I mean, maybe you have, again, some employees who just are going to try and do the least amount possible. Well, they shouldn't be working for you. But employees in general are not pushing back on RTO because they're resisting work. What they're resisting is an arbitrary or perceived to be arbitrary and unnecessary disruption to a system that for many is working well for them. The pandemic proved that the butts in seats mindset doesn't inherently equate to superior performance. Forcing, and here's what I've said, forcing a one-size-fits-all office policy can inadvertently signal a lack of trust and an outdated understanding of the vehicle of modern productivity. When you want, and I try to tell my clients this all the time, increased, maximized performance, productivity, and profitability, you need to meet employees where they are and create a workplace culture that thrives for them. A recent 2024 Pew Research study illuminated the top reasons employees push back. Top reasons are longer commutes. Well, why am I spending an hour or more each way to come into an office, which then, I mean, if it's an hour plus, you're talking about a major slice of my workday spent doing nothing but commuting. Also work-life balance. Daily commutes eat into personal time, family commitments, and overall well-being. Employees who reclaim time during remote work do not want to give this time savings of not having to commute back. They just don't. And honestly, it doesn't make sense from your organization's perspective either, due to suboptimal performance of your people. The other thing is, when you mandate that people come back, regardless of their circumstances or preferred working style, it comes across very aggressively as an unwillingness to be flexible and meet people where they are. If I am working remotely and I'm managing my personal appointments, my school pickups, structuring my day around individual productivity peaks, and also for many American employees, they are what we call, mostly females in their homes, sandwich caregivers, meaning they have somebody younger than them and somebody older than them living with them who need support, healthcare coverage, well-being from that employee of yours. Also, we now know, with tariffs and the economy and recession pending and really financial hardship on many Americans, the higher cost of childcare and transportation mean if you're going to force me to come into the office, you're going to increase my costs at a time where many Americans and your employees are struggling making family kitchen table decisions about what bills to pay, what they can, what they can't. People are struggling, and you're forcing additional hardship and burden on them, because now they're going to have to pay higher out-of-pocket expenses for children, fuel, public transportation, meals, which takes away their ability to live. That's what you're doing to your employees. But also, many employees from, again, this 2024 Pew Research study finds that the belief is that productivity isn't at the heart of this RTO mandate knee-jerk reaction. Employees often feel that if they were productive remotely, you're pushing or forcing them to return to the office isn't about their performance, but rather about you controlling them and other less apparent reasons, which means you don't trust them, which means out of sight, out of mind. I don't know what your work schedule is. And all of a sudden it gets back to that 20th century mindset of the pyramid command control of, I don't trust my people, I'm going to therefore force them back in. And guess what that causes? Surprise, surprise, resentment. So the top reasons that employees, maybe yours, are resisting RTO mandates: longer commute times, drained work-life balance. 78 people in this Pew Research survey indicated that's a concern. Perceived lack of set flexibility by their employer, 72%. Higher cost for childcare and transportation, 65%, indicated in the Pew Research study last year, 2024. This is a major issue. And also that productivity wasn't the issue, 58%. So this is crystal clear. So what does the data reveal about RTO? The resistance to RTO mandates from employees isn't anecdotal. Compelling data strongly supports this concern of employees that they're being forced back in. The numbers paint the clear picture, right, of employee preference and the potential impact on organizations that are failing to acknowledge them, ignoring the data, and just blindly saying, everybody, we have decided that you're coming back in. This is when it's going to start. This is who it affects. In most cases, everybody. Like it or find employment elsewhere. The data comes at a significant cost in terms of forced RTO impacts retention, meaning it causes people to consider leaving. It makes it harder to recruit new talent because they know what your RTO policy is and don't like it. And the overall health of the business. Your organization is a thriving, vibrant, organic, living life force comprised of human beings. And when you mandate RTO policies like other harsh, lacking in trust edicts, you create a toxic environment, and that poisons the well. So consider these statistics. 73% of Amazon employees indicated they consider leaving if forced into the office full-time, from Fortune. Recent government data shows that 23% of workers who were teleworking in the first quarter of last year, 2024, indicated a continued preference for remote work arrangements, even as companies, maybe yours, were considering or implemented RTO as the de facto work scenario. So there's still a disconnect. You have all of this evidence, all of this data to support the value of allowing employees to pick and choose their hybrid work environment, but there's still a disconnect with what employees want and what leadership is dictating. KPMG 2024 CEO Outlook revealed that 83% of CEOs expect employees to be back in the office full-time in the next 3 years. There is an incredible fundamental chasm or divide that's going on between senior executives in organizations and their employees. It's a contrast between leadership's expectations of employees coming back to work and employee realities is precisely what this organization, Lift Human Capital Management, calls the Great Office Rebellion. And I love that. So you can see the dichotomy that exists depending on the perspective of the employee-employer relationship. The employer, vis-a-vis senior executives, 83% of CEOs expect their people to be back in the office within the next 3 years. 90% plus of large employers have implemented some form of RTO policy as soon after COVID as mid-2023. 75% increase in RTO mandates in corporate America going back from 2022 to 2023. It was like, okay, we're done. But what do employees want? What are maybe but employees in the aggregate in the American workforce saying that they want, expect, desire? 76% of workers would decline a job offer that doesn't include some remote work flexibility. 73% of Amazon's employees, remember, Amazon was one of the first big tech corporations to tell all of their workforce, you must come back to the office. So thus the reference to Amazon. 73% of Amazon employees indicated they'd consider leaving if forced into the office full-time. 16% decrease of employee engagement when workers are forced back without their input. So that's some real discernible gap between understanding of RTO policy from the senior executive suite and what your employees are saying they prefer. So I thought this was interesting. Check out this subthread, this Reddit from going back 2 months. The real reason companies are pushing RTO, it's labor costs. Aha, okay. So if it's not performance, it's not productivity, it's not collegial esprit de corps and collaboration, labor costs. Okay, yet again, it's corporations making a financial calculus at the expense of their people. It's not to treat employees like children. It's not because they believe in higher collaboration and culture. It's not even the executive team's ego, which is driving organizations to demand RTO mandates. It's all about labor costs. COVID era exposed that most white-collar workers don't need 8 hours a day to get their work done. As if this was common knowledge to me for the 30 years that I worked in corporate. This should not be news to people, but okay. Both in observing behaviors and by people brazenly talking about the fact that they can do with less time as much, if not more, from a work productivity standpoint. If Jack and Jill are teammates and they both openly talk about how they only need 4 hours a day to get their stuff done, their boss will just keep the best one and lay off the other because the company can still get what they need out of one person, not 2 employee costs. Therefore, it exposes people working remotely and RTO. It exposes that companies are spending too much on their labor costs, which in many, if not all organizations, headcount, payroll is the largest expense that they have to contend with. So they go there when they look for cost-cutting measures. Okay, RTO is a way to naturally reduce staff by having people quit without the need to pay severance. You come back to the office, I don't want to. Go find employment elsewhere. That's it, I'm out of here. Oh, well, okay, cost savings. I just did a video, I dropped a video just about a week ago on the CEO of AT&T recently on a memo to all the management team last week saying after they started talking about this in January, they're going to move forward with having all 100,000 employees come back to the office. And the CEO said, for those people who are not willing to come back in, you obviously don't share the values that we possess here at AT&T for collegiality, greater culture, workplace collaboration. You should seek employment elsewhere. So it's out there. This isn't a surprise. So it's easier to manage your workforce when the people who don't want to come back in are filtered out of the organization. Let me say it the way you should say it. They're forced out of your organization. Honestly, wouldn't be surprised if we go back to remote work in 5 to 10 years, once most large companies have reduced their labor by 50+% by having fewer headcount, more offshoring, and of course, this tsunami of AI being able to replace employee work productivity. Then the next wave of saving costs will be reduced real estate expenses. So, I mean, there is obviously a motivation where corporations are doing some kind of a human capital calculus. And they're making the determination that RTO, forcing your employees or demanding your employees come back full time, is financially a desirable end result. So I really love, I want to kind of go to Transform on thought leadership about how you actually quantify or how do you create a formula for RTO success and what most companies are missing as they demand people come back to work. So return to office. For many employees globally, these 3 letters have come to look and feel rather Voldemort-esque. There's your Harry Potter reference. That's because according to Fex Jobs, 2024 remote work stats and trend report, 95% of people would rather work remotely than in office. So unequivocal. And I really, Arshan Ahmad has come up with this calculus, this formula, which is something that I have to admit, I allude to these considerations, these criteria, but I haven't formally constructed this kind of formula. So I think it's gangster. So I wanted to share it with you. So a lot of other companies like JP Morgan, Snap, Salesforce, just a few of them, require their employees to be in the office either full-time or at least 4 days a week. Amazon weren't happy, to say the least, which you heard some of the data to support that, when they were told they had to come back in. And then they started Slack channels where they were voicing their frustration. And they, in certain instances, reached out to the media to let them know that they were upset. So people are feeling concerned about returning to an office environment, going even beyond Amazon. Leaders, and you may be one of them in your organization, leaders have been, let's just say, put it nicely, inconsistent regarding their policies and attitudes and approach to remote work ever since the pandemic and up until now, which sets false precedents, confusing expectations in the minds of employees, and that creates toxicity and destroys and wears away any reputational brand and goodwill you have with your people. Many employees championed remote work as a utopian ideal of working, but now companies who gave them the opportunity to work remote or hybrid are now rescinding and taking away. They're taking it back. Employees are not blind. They see the toxic, dubious intentions that leaders harbor when it comes to leaders saying you must come back to the office. So as I said before, there is a noticeable divide between employees and employers regarding RTO. And I've been seeing in my practice, and Arshan talks about this, a widening gap. If we're not careful about bringing this gap, closing the gap, bad RTO policies will cause you to lose valuable people in the company. by lighting the match for a mass exodus of attrition or your rock stars, your top performers leaving. In the same way that Amazon followed the lead of other leaders pushing full-time RTO, employees will look to their peers leaving and they'll leave with them. Especially when you factor in the behaviors, values, and traits of millennials and Gen Z. They're not going to tolerate this. And this is a 21st century American workforce, which is now strongly built foundationally on those two categories of employees. As for the last few decades, boomers and matures have been leaving the workforce, which leaves us Gen Xers to a lesser extent, but a prevalence of Gen Z and millennials. So let's look at what good return to office policy development is. Employees are going to have to come to the office in some way, shape, or form, but there is a way to do it in a strategic, logical way to avoid the damage and destruction that you can do when you mandate a universal return to office policy as Amazon did. So what's good RTO? Again, I'm going to put the link to all of these resources, but you definitely want to take a look at Arshan Ahmed, a CEO and co-founder of WorkSense AI, for his model, his formula on measuring, quantifying RTO. So good RTO is when you explain to your employees why you're asking them to return to the office and help with the transition by easing them into it instead of arbitrarily decided upon mandates that dictate you will return by such and such a date. Do you want them back in the office to be innovative? Show them why. But if you can, be prepared to have a conversation when they challenge you. What do you mean I have to be in the office to be innovative or productive? I'm not seeing any reason why that would be the case. Well, let's explain to you why we found that that works in our organization. That's a logical, transparent conversation. So transparency when it comes to RTO policies cannot be stressed enough. There are a lot of moving parts that go into RTO, and sometimes corporate language of memos such as Andy Jassy's at Amazon can provide more ambiguity than answers. If you're being vague, if you're being vague and you're not being transparent, you're being maybe hypocritical or you're being confusing, that doesn't serve any party well. So demonstrating the scope of your return to office and the intricacy helps to alleviate some of the uncertainty for your employees and the pain. Erin Ito, Senior Insight Manager at BetterUp, says the more proactively you, your organization, can provide transparency is helpful. So I want to get to the model. Why does good RTO, return to office, even matter? It matters because you're saving on losing workforce members. Some employees want the camaraderie. Some employees want the face time with their managers. They want to experience an organizational environment of being in person and experiencing culture firsthand. They want to be coached and mentored. They want to have the in-person team spirit dynamic. So following the examples I shared with you so far, mothers in the workforce have actually shown higher levels of ambition relative to their colleagues. Bad RTO policies are going to drive those members out of your organization. Good return to office increases employee engagement, reduces loss, increases retention. For instance, when you treat return to office as a mandate or an attempt at better monitoring your employees, you're essentially saying, leave. We don't trust you. We're belittling you. We're not allowing you to have control or autonomy over your work. But you're a super rising star. You don't want that. They're not going to even tell you. They're just going to leave. So a novel approach to calculating RTO. Check out this formulaic approach. So how do you come up with an RTO score for your organization? You start with employee engagement, and you magnify or multiply that with the performance review that your people receive, and then you divide that by the attrition rate in your organization. The beauty is you can do this by manager, you can do it by department, by office, by function. You can do it then in the aggregate, and you can get a really, really objective lens into how RTO is and is not maybe working at optimal effect. So engagement's fairly broad metric. It shows how active or how much of oneself they're bringing to work. And since RTO involves bringing oneself into work physically, how willing the person is to play ball at your company, given RTO seems intuitive on its relevance. Often, RTO falls victim to becoming a tool for control rather than inspiring. And this is really important. It's all about control in many organizations, and I've seen it. They use the language when I'm talking to senior executives, founders, HR folks. They're talking about RTO in what they're not even maybe consciously aware of is about controlling employees. So now the performance review, so engagement times performance. Performance is judged on a 4 or 5 point scale. Typically, it's fairly universally scored across organizations. You can implement this pretty seamlessly, pretty easily. So Arshan decided on this as a metric because it's widespread use, but it's something tangible. That's the pushback I get often. Oh, this is warm and fuzzy, this RTO, and you talk about productivity and collaboration, but it's a way to measure it. So you're going to see, because of increased return to office, how in performance of people is judged. Since many executives have gone on record as saying that remote work could negatively impact somebody's career. And then you divide engagement multiplied by performance. You divide by attrition, because attrition is critically important. And I use that when I do assessments of my clients' human capital anyway. So attrition is the warning sign that when you attempt to implement return to office, that it forces people or it pushes people out. So therefore, pre and post RTO, if you see a spike in attrition levels, that means more people are leaving. So forget about the silent quitting where they just emotionally check out. They're physically leaving your organization. And so you can apply this assessment, this RTO scorecard, whether it's full-time in office, pure remote, or hybrid. And you can see in this example, hybrid has the highest RTO score. Based on conventional wisdom or common logic, attrition would probably be lower in the remote setting and in office setting, which would be much higher. Engagement, however, aligns with what we already know about these 3 settings. So bottom line, there's a way to measure this and a way to quantify. Many remote workers say they'd be likely to leave their job if they could no longer work from home. Here's the reality. I want to go back to January, and this is the Pew Research findings. And I'm not going to cover all of it because it's really data intense, but you can drill through it yourself. So this article written by Kim Parker does a summary, a really, really good job of summarizing Pew Research's findings. So a growing number of US companies are requiring their people back to work. President-elect, or now President, Donald Trump's incoming administration has signaled they are going to do the same to federal employees. They've done one better. They've eviscerated many federal agencies, US aid. They pushed out the E&I initiatives, but they're also focusing on a demand to return to office. So, among employed adults who have a job that can be done from home, 75% of those employees are working remotely at least some of the time. So 3/4 of employees with a full-time job have this already. So nearly half of workers in this group of workers who are gainfully employed in full-time employment with one organization, 46% say if their employer no longer allowed them to work from home, they'd be unlikely to stay at their current job. Not want to leave, have to leave. This includes 26% of survey respondents who say they'd be very unlikely to stay. So the data is here. The data is here. Some groups of workers are more likely than others to say they might leave their job if the employer no longer allowed them to work from home. Who are they? Women are somewhat more likely than men to say they'd have to leave, 49% versus 43%. Workers under the age of 50 are more likely than older workers to say this, 50% versus 35%. Workers who are still or currently working from home all the time are much more likely than those who do so most or some of the time, 61% versus 47% and 28% collectively. So these views also differ by job satisfaction feedback, and you can do the assessment yourself. Growing share of workers required to be in the office a certain number of days. Among workers with teleworkable jobs who are not currently working from home all the time, what is the percent saying they are required to work from their workplace? In February of 2023, it was 63%. It's climbed up from the fourth quarter of 2024, October, 75%. Most hybrid workers, those whose schedules involve working from home most or some of the time, don't want to work from home all the time. So they already have indicated a predisposition to come back to the office in some schedule. And among hybrid workers in the Pew Research findings, only 24% say they work from home all the time. A majority, 72% respondents, say they choose a hybrid environment. So this is why RTO policies has to be taking into consideration every single employee. And then lastly, just I'll find a point or two about this Amazon decision, which happened last October 2024. Amazon's recent decision to implement a 5-day at work return to office policy sparked intense discussion inside the organization. While corporate leaders like Amazon CEO Andy Jassy believe the approach restores collaboration, strengthens company culture, critics argue that it's regressive. It's taking a step backwards, in fact. It's not achieving the desired consequence. More importantly, such mandated RTO policies fail to address the true roots of declining productivity and engagement, lack of transparency, and siloed organizational processes. So don't blame the fact that people aren't in an office environment working together. There's a lot more going on. So there you have it. Mandating universality that all employees return to the office, regardless of their individual circumstances, preferences, etc., poses a very real damaging threat to organizations. So having said that, it would behoove you and your leadership brain trust and your mindset to think very strategically about the rationale for RTO and approach it in a very logical fashion. If you have any more questions, I'd love to talk to you about this and the work that I'm doing with my organizations that I coach and consult with. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. I'd love to know what you think. Share comments, be civil. And if you like the video, please, there are over 600 similar videos that shine a light on organizations that are creating amazing workplace culture and hiring the best, creating people-first strategies. So these insights, inspiration, and ideas are meant to unleash your people's performance, productivity, and profitability. Thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing day. Take care.